Chapter 1486 The Visitor. Late at night. It was dark, so dark that you could not see your hand in front of your face. The whole world was shrouded in darkness. There was a sound of drizzling rain, cold and noisy. Zhang Yi walked in the darkness and saw torrential rain falling from the sky. Rumbling. A white flash of lightning pierced the sky, illuminating the darkness. Below, the sea was surging, with black waves rising up to tens of meters high, as if ready to completely flood the Tianhai city where Zhang Yi was located. He subconsciously touched his arm. The cold rain made his arm feel cold. Why is it so cold? Aren't I wearing my combat uniform? Zhang Yi thought inexplicably. Rumbling. Another thunderclap fell from the sky. This time, the thunder was long and narrow, as if it had directly cut the entire sky in half. In the endless darkness, it became the only light. But this brief moment of light made Zhang Yi freeze in an instant. He stared blankly ahead, feeling only a creepy sense of dread, his hair almost standing on end. Because in the dark ahead, on a huge cliff, was crouching a dark shadow. He was covered in black armor, had a pair of twisted horns, and a long, thick tail. A pair of bloodshot eyes stared at him from a distance. The underworld. Hades' gatekeeper. Zhang Yi couldn't help but let out his title. The moment he shouted it, the huge figure moved, and in an instant it was in front of him, its face pressed against his. Ah! Zhang Yi suddenly woke up from his bed. Looking at the familiar scene around him, he realized that he had just had a dream. But when he looked out the window, it was still gray outside. It was late at night, and the world covered in snow looked pale. It wasn't as endless as the darkness in his dream, which made him breathe a little easier. Zhang Yi, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare? The slightly lethargic voice of Zhou Keir came from beside him. She rubbed her bleary eyes and placed one hand on Zhang Yi's shoulder. The silk quilt couldn't hide her proud figure and delicate skin. Zhang Yi took several deep breaths to calm himself down. He shook his head and muttered, "The words the Sky Dragon King said before he died have had a huge impact on me. I dreamt that the guy from Star Island's Misty Valley was coming to kill me." Zhou Keir was silent for a long time after hearing this, and could only hug Zhang Yi tightly with her soft body. "It's okay, we'll all get better and better." East Sea Region, Military Department. A bolt of thunder split the sky, and Azure Dragon suddenly sat up in bed. He gasped for breath, his bare upper body covered in scars and muscles. He ran his hands over his chest, relieved to feel his heart still beating. He sat up and walked to the window. Looking out the east-facing window, he could see the sea in the distance, East Sea City by the sea. And beyond the sea to the east, the direction of Star Island. He gazed at the surface of the sea, and the slightly undulating water seemed to be surging with an undercurrent, which made him frown deeply. Is that thing not over yet? In the following days, Zhang Yi and the others worked hard to become stronger. In addition, they began to cultivate the mutants native to Tianhai City. Xiao Honglian, Xing Tian, and Lu Dehai were among the first to be cultivated. Just giving them a portion of the origin of the Earth centipede was enough to greatly enhance their strength in a short period of time. After that, it was a matter of enhancing the power of the mutants in the three bases on a large scale, so that the overall level of Tianhai City could be raised to a higher standard. Zhang Yi never liked to do these things, so he arranged for Yang Xinxin to handle them. He trusted Yang Xinxin to know exactly what to do. The 4th month after returning from the southwest region, Tianhai City welcomed a familiar yet unfamiliar guest. He is familiar because he and Zhang Yi have known each other for a long time. He is unfamiliar because this is the first time he has been to Tianhai City. This guest is Deng Shentong. Deng Shentong first sent a video message to Zhang Yi, saying that he wanted to come to Tianhai City to talk to him about something important. After getting Zhang Yi's permission, he immediately drove there without stopping. The fact that he did not take the Blizzard City special train made Zhang Yi feel a little strange. This showed that Deng Shentong was not here on behalf of Blizzard City, but had a personal agenda. Zhang Yi had a good relationship with the Deng family. In the time since, they had given Zhang Yi a lot of help, and Zhang Yi had also invested in Deng technology, which gave him access to their research results. The two sides benefited from each other. So that morning, Deng Shentong's car pulled up to the front doors of Yunk Manor. He walked into the villa and was full of emotion at first. "You're living a life that's even more enjoyable than an emperor's. Even my uncle doesn't have it as good as you." Zhang Yi smiled and invited him to sit on the sofa. "Everything is predicated on having sufficient strength and resources. But I was really surprised that you would come to see me." Zhou Keir brought 2 cups of hot coffee and then understandably withdrew. When men are talking about things, she won't stand around unless she's specifically told to. It was obvious to anyone that Deng Shentong was not there as a guest, but had something very important to discuss. Deng Shentong sat down next to Zhang Yi, took a sip of the coffee prepared by Zhou Keir, and smiled. "I don't come to the temple 3 times for nothing. I do have something very important to discuss with you this time." Zhang Yi glanced at him and said, "Just get to the point. You know I've never been one to beat around the bush." Deng Shentong, however, did not rush to speak, but instead took out an iron box from his body and carefully unfolded it in front of Zhang Yi. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper that looked as if it was from years ago. Deng Shentong gently lifted it with his hands and held it in front of Zhang Yi's eyes. "Take a look at this first." Zhang Yi noticed the supernatural residue on the paper at just a glance. "What is this?" He carefully took the paper and passed it over, and indeed felt a faint trace of supernatural power on it. It was as if the paper had traveled through the centuries, and the characters on it were still in traditional Chinese characters, but it was clear that it was not particularly old. Zhang Yi could still recognize some of the characters on it. "What is it?" Zhang Yi asked, staring at Deng Shentong. Deng Shentong said to him seriously, "The supernatural residue on this comes from an ancient person from 600 years ago. So, in ancient times, there were already mutants in this world." Zhang Yi was silent for a moment, then he laughed. "This is not really any news. Biological mutation is a process that is constantly taking place. Although the past was not like the present, with the Great Mutation era, it was normal for 1 or 2 people with special abilities to occasionally appear in a huge biological population." Chapter 1487 Heart Sutra. Deng Shentong smiled slightly, "But if you knew his name, I don't think you would be so calm." "Oh? Then tell me, who is he?" Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow, his eyes full of playfulness. Deng Shentong said, "That person's name is Wang Shoren. The world calls him Wang Yangming." Upon hearing this name, Zhang Yi's gaze did indeed become a little more serious. Almost no one in the Huaxu Kingdom who was educated had never heard of Wang Yangming. He was the founder of the Heart Sutra and was considered by a master a century ago to be one of the 2.5 saints in the history of the Huaxu Kingdom. He was revered by countless people because he accomplished the 3 major achievements of establishing one's moral character, one's achievements, and one's words during his lifetime. "You mean to say that Wang Yangming was the mutant back then?" Deng Shentong said without haste or urgency. "The historical records are clear. Back then, Wang Yangming attained enlightenment at Longchang, and in the middle of the night suddenly had an epiphany that the mind is the foundation of all things. He also said, 'The way of the sage is within my nature, those who seek the truth in things are mistaken.' So his heart was clear, and he felt a sudden sense of relief. He let out a long shout that carried for tens of li, for as long as half an hour. In the past, many people doubted that this vision was fabricated. But now it seems that he had a breakthrough at that time and became a mutant." Deng Shentong pointed to the page of paper. "This is the best proof." Zhang Yi could feel the breath of time on the paper, and it was not fake. Wang Yangming. Zhang Yi became curious. Those outstanding figures in history were mutants. So what? I don't think this is a big deal. So, what are you trying to tell me? Deng Shentong pointed to the page. Can you read the text on it? Of course Zhang Yi could read it. If he couldn't, the intelligent system could translate it for him. The data flooded into his mind for a careful analysis. This chapter comes from Wang Shoren's Heart Sutra, which records the inward search for the self, so as to achieve inner enlightenment and not be stuck in the external world. Unlike the widely circulated version of Heart Sutra, this seems to be a completely new version. Zhang Yi seemed to have grasped something, but not quite. What do you mean? He looked at Deng Shentong, waiting for him to offer an explanation. Deng Shentong said, over the past 2.5 years, Deng Technology has conducted extensive research on mutants, mutant beasts, and mutant flowers, plants, and trees. We discovered that the source of supernatural powers may be from within. It is born within the creature itself, and most of it comes from within humans, to be precise. He crossed his arms and said with a deep gaze, nowadays, we have basically confirmed this. And we have mastered a certain method of using concentrated power to rapidly grow mutants. Zhang Yi stared at him. Take the power from a mutant or mutant beast and concentrate it in a single individual. Is that it? This seems to be the same as killing a mutant and taking its origin. Deng Shentong laughed, indeed. But our method is more efficient. But that's not the point. The current method has a low conversion rate. The prerequisite for training a top-notch mutant is sacrificing 2-digit or even 3-digit mutts, which is not cost-effective. Zhang Yi crossed his legs. So, what does this have to do with Wang Yangming's Heart Sutra? Deng Shentong said, we have been unremittingly researching the supernatural, which includes investigating historical mutants and data that may exist. The closest to the present day, and the most clearly documented mutant is Wang Yangming. Moreover, he is also the only one who has organized the supernatural into a theory. The Heart Sutra refers to gaining inner strength, so that one can see through to one's innermost being and enter a transcendent realm. Deng Shentong shrugged. Wang Yangming believed that this was a realm that everyone could achieve. However, in reality, this is not the case. So although the Heart Sutra is famous, to this day, not many people can truly reach his level. Zhang Yi said, you mean to say that the Heart Sutra is a foreigner's understanding of the supernatural from 600 years ago? It is also a theoretical guide to cultivation? The so-called cultivation refers to developing one's own potential. So far, humans have not discovered any means of enhancing the strength of supernatural abilities other than devouring other people. However, everyone has great potential within themselves, and if they can develop it, it will open up a huge treasure trove, just like mining. This can also greatly enhance the strength of a mutant. Deng Shentong nodded. Yes, that's exactly what I think. Zhang Yi's eyes flashed with a strange light. But this book is not in your hands right now. He saw right through Deng Shentong's thoughts. And it's in a very troublesome place right now, and you don't have the ability to get it yourself, so you came to me for help. Am I right? Deng Shentong laughed and clapped his hands. You are indeed the famous chaos. You are amazing, you guessed what I wanted to say in one go. Zhang Yi laughed, thinking to himself, just as expected. What makes you think I will help you? First of all, the story you told is indeed very interesting, but there is no evidence to prove that Wang Yangming's Heart Sutra is worth my help. Secondly, for me to help, it has to be at least a level S mission. You want me to take risks? You shouldn't think I'm new to this. Deng Shentong's eyes lit up. Although Zhang Yi's words seemed to be a rejection, they were actually giving him a chance, because Zhang Yi was carefully weighing the pros and cons. I have full confidence in the capabilities of the Heart Sutra. Zhang Yi, take a look at this. He extended his arm in front of Zhang Yi. Then a powerful supernatural power condensed in the palm of his hand and turned into a bright light ball like a pearl. Zhang Yi was a little surprised and said, your strength has increased again. It had been almost a year since they last met, when they were in the Qinling Mountains. At that time, Deng Shentong's supernatural ability index was only 9,500 points. But now, he has reached a level of around 9,900 points. To improve so much in just 1 year is absolutely rapid progress. But Zhang Yi still gave Deng Shentong a deep look. Relying on the remaining pages of the Heart Sutra? Do you think I would believe that kind of nonsense? Deng Shentong gathered his power and shook his head. It's not this. It's a woman. She was exposed to the original Heart Sutra just once and gained extremely special powers. That was much more terrifying than my current improvement. It was a miracle. Zhang Yi, a character who can be called a sage, cannot be measured by common sense. Chapter 1488, Lobbyist. Deng Shentong told Zhang Yi about the encounter he had with Amber. Zhang Yi couldn't help but marvel. There are many amazing things in the world, and there are many opportunities, and he wasn't the only one to encounter them. It's not strange that Deng Shentong encountered his opportunity and became even more powerful. Everyone has their own world, and they are the protagonists in their own world. The Heart Sutra is hidden in the National Museum de Liangdu in Neon. It is the national treasure of our Huashu kingdom. For whatever reason, I think we need to get it back. Deng Shentong looked at Zhang Yi with a sincere face. This is your second concern. This mission poses almost no risk to you. With your strength, you can now sweep across the entire kingdom of Neon. The only thing to worry about is the Columbia Navy fleet station in Neon. But they can't threaten your life, can they? Having said that, Zhang Yi's heart had actually wavered a little. If the Heart Sutra was really written by an ancient mutant known as a sage, then it must have contained the lifetime's work of Wang Yangming. Its value is extremely high for modern mutants. And there's one more thing. It is the national treasure of the Huashu kingdom, and it cannot be placed in their national museum by the Neon people. Zhang Yi rubbed his fingers together. He thought about the war that had taken place over 100 years ago. Now, it is time to retrieve what our ancestors had been taken from them. Some things always have to come to an end. Zhang Yi didn't want to prove how great he was, but the education he had received since childhood had always made him think one thing: to get back what they had lost, the most important thing was dignity. This was something that many people in the Huashu kingdom had been trying to do for many years. No matter how pessimistic they sounded, they seemed to be indifferent to everything. But people who exist in a group cannot help but have a sense of national honor. Humans are creatures that cannot avoid relying on the collective to exist. Zhang Yi stared at Deng Shentong and narrowed his eyes slightly. I don't believe you. You just know the price of deceiving me. So I promise to participate in this operation. You'd better give me satisfactory results. Understand? With his strength, sweeping Neon would be no problem. Even if he encounters any trouble, he can get out unscathed. This is the confidence of the world's #1 defensive mutant at the moment. After obtaining Zhang Yi's consent, Deng Shentong's face immediately beamed with excitement. Don't worry. If it turns out that I'm wrong, I'll give you my life. In addition, to express my sincerity, I've also brought some gifts. Deng Shentong took out a palm-sized silver metal box from his body and handed it to Zhang Yi. This is the latest research achievement of Deng's technology, which can help people improve their strength and break through their limits. At present, it has a good effect on mutant below 9,500 points in the ability index. He laughed and said, I know that you have a few friends around you who are a bit worse off. These will be helpful to them. Zhang Yi's eyes flashed with a light, and he smiled and nodded as he put it away. This is indeed very useful to me. Fatty Sue and Uncle Yu's talents were among the lower among the members of the martial arts school. Now they have been able to break through 9,000 points, all thanks to Zhang Yi's massive use of the Earth Centipede origin without regard for consumption. However, judging from the current situation, it is likely that their upper limit will be less than 9,500 points for the rest of their lives. Unless they are given a fragment of the Source of God in the future, Zhang Yi does not have a better way to improve their strength. However, the Source of God is extremely precious and not so easy to obtain. Now the potion sent by Deng Shentong really made Zhang Yi very happy. Just formulate a plan of action and bring it to me. When to set off and how to act specifically, you plan it yourself. I'll just be responsible for the attack. Zhang Yi said to Deng Shentong. He always hated trouble. Deng Shentong nodded, of course. I'll arrange everything, and I'll send you the information in due course. Zhang Yi invited Deng Shentong to stay for lunch, but Deng Shentong waved his hand to decline. I need to get back as soon as possible to lay out the battle plan. The national treasure is in danger as long as it stays in the hands of the Neon people. If someone among them who knows their stuff discovers the secret, it won't be good news for us. Suit yourself. After seeing Deng Shentong off, Zhang Yi told his family and friends about the matter. Uncle Yu was the first to get excited when he heard that Zhang Yi planned to go to Neon. He slammed his hand on the table and said with his white teeth bared, Zhang Yi, this time you must let me go. Teach Neon a good lesson. Zhang Yi laughed and said, that's easy to say. Neon's combat power has seriously collapsed these days. Since the battle on Star Island more than a year ago, they have almost lost all of their top-level combat power. The remaining power is no longer enough to withstand the onslaught of a team at our level. However, we cannot afford to be careless. I remember that Neon has produced a new Epsilon. What's his name? He looked at Yang Xinshin. Yang Xinshin said indifferently, Evil Demon. That's obviously not his real name, it's probably a pseudonym or something. The guys from Neon always like to come up with some intimidating nicknames for themselves. For example, King of Beasts Sarazawa is so poor in stuff. Zhang Yi leaned back on the sofa. Do we have any intelligence on him? Yang Xinshin shook her head. Not much. We only know that they completely unified Neon a year ago. The organization led by the evil demon boy is called the Royal Demon Court. As for his strength and abilities, there has never been any intelligence. After all, after an Epsilon is born, it is still very easy to sweep the region, Zhang Yi said. The newly minted Epsilon, even if they are strong, are still within the range of predictability. On our side, however, there are 2 Epsilons and 1 quasi-Epsilon level combat power. A proud smile appeared at the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. Looking at his now powerful team, of course he felt a sense of pride within him. He single-handedly built up this team. Not to mention that he is now a mutant with a 20,000-point ability index, at the level of the Black Chariot. He is at the top of his game, and the best on the planet. Apart from the likes of Ho-Tu, there are few monsters that can threaten him. The few top powers have spent the resources of entire countries training them. After hearing the whole story, everyone agreed that there would be no danger on this trip to Neon. However, out of his usual prudence, Zhang Yi still decided to bring along his main combat force. So, as before, the frog stayed behind to guard the house, while Zhang Yi took Liang Yu, Yang Xinshin, Zhou Qir, Mu Yan, Hua Hua, Uncle Yu and Fatty Su to Neon. As for Yang Xia, Zhou Jaime and Lu Karen, Zhang Yi told them to stay at home. The girl Flora, whom he brought back from the country of Nash, was also at home. They could take care of her and teach her the language of modern humans. Chapter 1489, Arrival in Edo. Zhang Yi had the manpower ready on his side, and Deng Shentong quickly sent over various intelligence and combat plans. The biggest trouble in this trip to Neon was not the local force Royal Demon Court, but how to avoid the Columbia Navy. After all, according to current intelligence, the Ocean Fleet has added a new Epsilon-class mutant. The original Billy the Kid has now been promoted and become a powerful being with the ability Code Piercer. Zhang Yi still remembers the abilities of that guy vividly. If Zhang Yi hadn't become Epsilon at the time, he really wouldn't have been able to deal with him so easily. Add to that the veteran strongman Cade Lease and the powerful military support of the Ocean Fleet, and they will definitely cause them a lot of trouble. Therefore, Deng Shentong's suggestion was for Zhang Yi to take a group of their elite mutants, sneak into the Neon capital of Edo, and first investigate the location of the Heart Sutra. After all, after the end of the world, the whole world had become chaotic. It was hard to say whether it was still being kept in the National Museum de Liangdu. Zhang Yi agreed with Deng Shentong's suggestion. So a few days later, Deng Shentong led a group of people to Tianhai City. This mission was not carried out in the name of Blizzard City, but in the name of the Deng family. Therefore, the people who came were all trustworthy people that Deng Shentong could trust, and they were all mutants with a certain level of strength. Among them was his deputy captain, Bai Chunyu. However, the other two people really took Zhang Yi by surprise. Because they were also old acquaintances, Bai Li Changqing and Wu Di. The two came up to Zhang Yi and honestly shouted, "Captain! They are under your control now?" Zhang Yi asked with a raised eyebrow. Deng Shentong shrugged his shoulders. "You are the temporary captain of the Tengu squad, but you rarely participate in operations directly during the week. So most of the time, they will be working with me. Do you have a problem with that?" Zhang Yi laughed. "Of course not, I feel more at ease letting them work with you." He walked up to the two men and gave Bai Li Changqing a shoulder punch and patted Wu Di on the shoulder. "It's been a long time, what are your abilities now?" Bai Li Changqing scratched his head sheepishly. "I'm ashamed to say that after so long, my supernatural ability index has only reached 9,200 points. Wu Di raised his chin proudly. "I'm at 9,300 points now, Captain. Commander Zhu said that when I reach 9,500 points, I'll be allowed to form a team on my own." Bai Li Changqing frowned and said sternly, "Wu, what are you talking about?" It was obviously inappropriate to say such things in front of Zhang Yi and Deng Shentong. Wu Di had grown a lot in strength, but his personality was still the same as it had been in the past, not very introverted. Zhang Yi didn't care about that, and he looked at Wu Di and said, "Bian Junwo once told me that your talent was the strongest in the investigation team. Now it seems that you really haven't let him down." Hearing Bian Junwo's name, Wu Di's expression also became serious. "I'll always remember what the captain said. One day, I'll rebuild the Black Robe Squad." Zhang Yi nodded. "I'll be waiting for that day to come." With Zhang Yi there, the preparations for strategic supplies such as weapons and equipment were much easier. There was no need for planning, just bring it all. Everyone changed into their everyday cold weather clothing outside, with their combat uniforms on underneath. Then, Zhang Yi activated his supernatural ability of space and set off towards Edo with everyone else. This was the first time Zhang Yi had traveled to Neon's mainland since the end of the world. Now, he could travel 4,000 meters each time he traveled, so it wasn't long before he had crossed the East China Sea and arrived over the Neon Islands. From a bird's-eye view, the entire island was white, with most of it covered in snow. Only a few large cities were still functioning. However, when Zhang Yi and the others arrived at the outskirts of the city, they were still amazed by what they saw. Zhang Yi observed from a great height and saw that the city was bustling with activity, full of people. Although some of the tall buildings had collapsed, the overall rhythm of the city had not been affected. He could even see shops on the streets that were still doing business. People were dressed in winter clothes, walking in groups of 2 or 3, chatting and laughing as they walked past on the street. There was also very little snow on the streets, as if it was cleaned every day. Even Xingjing City, which was the most prosperous at the end of the Huashu Kingdom, could hardly have been this clean. Something's strange. "I always feel like there's something wrong," Zhang Yi said with a frown. "Deng Shentong, what's going on here?" At this time, Deng Shentong and the others were all in Muyan's shadow space, but they could observe everything outside. Deng Shentong said, "This is how Edo is like. After all, this was once the largest metropolis in Asia, and it is also the base of operations for the Royal Demon Court. With the concentration of the entire Neon's resources and most of the population, it is understandable that it would be more prosperous." Zhang Yi touched his chin. "It seems to make some sense, but I always feel that something is not quite right. After the end of the world, can people still live in peace and contentment? It only makes sense that most ordinary humans should be gathered together to work, right? He would not think that the leaders of these mutant organizations in Neon would be merciful. Deng Shentong, however, said, I also suspected that there was something wrong here at first, but according to our investigation, their situation has been like this for at least a year. Zhang Yi pondered for a moment before saying, let's not rush into action just yet. Let's investigate carefully and see what we can find out. He made a quick dash, weaving through the streets several times before arriving at Edo Castle. Mu Yan's shadow unfurled on the wall, and Deng Shentong and the others emerged from it. They were all wearing thick winter clothing, indistinguishable from the Neon residents in the city. And with the aid of the intelligence system, there was no problem with communication, so as long as there was no fighting, they would not be discovered as outsiders at all. Zhang Yi let out a breath, which immediately turned into white mist in the air. Without a helmet, the half of his face that was exposed felt a little cold. Don't act rashly during the day. There are too many people here. Wait until nightfall and explore the Daliangda Museum again. Zhang Yi said. Deng Shentong nodded, okay, I'll take your advice. Zhang Yi continued, until then, let's collect intelligence separately, not together, so as not to be exposed. He pointed to the communicator hidden under his winter clothes. Contact me immediately if anything happens. I can be at any corner of the entire Edo Castle in less than a minute. Fatty Su's eyes lit up. After coughing, he walked up to Zhang Yi. Boss, can we go wherever we want? Zhang Yi glanced at him and said, it's still daytime, and you want to go to a cabaret? Chapter 1490, Akihabara. Fatty Su almost jumped up, nervously looking at the others, and arguing, no. I want to go to Akihabara to have a look. Akihabara in Edo is the holy land of otaku. As a senior otaku, Fatty Su, who was able to come to Edo after the end of the world, naturally wanted to go and have a look. Uncle Yu gave him a punch. Su Chunlei, what time is it? We're here to do a job, can you stop just thinking about having fun? Fatty Su immediately lowered his head in distress. Deng Shentong, however, said with a smile, actually, it doesn't really matter. I'm familiar with the Daliangda Museum, so let me take someone there. After all, I suggested this action. We can all spread out and investigate the whole of Edo Castle. Akihabara is also a very densely populated area, and it's worth investigating. Zhang Yi crossed his arms and said in a serious voice, in that case, according to you, there are also a lot of people in the Kabuki theater. Cough cough, that will have to wait until the night. Deng Shentong laughed. In the end, Zhang Yi arranged for everyone to form teams and head to different areas of Edo to investigate. He was in a team with Zhou Qir and Yang Xinxin, Fatty Su was with Uncle Yu and Flower, and Lian Yu was with Mu Yan. Deng Shentong and the others would act in groups of 4. The groups split into 4 directions and began investigating Edo Castle. Zhou Qir and Yang Xinxin were both wearing thick winter clothes and deerskin boots, with only their small faces showing. They snuggled up to Zhang Yi on either side. It looked like the perfect family of 3. Walking along the spacious streets of Edo, they saw not a few pedestrians, and on both sides of the street were some businesses open for business. Although they are all separated by thick glass, the light shining through and the signs outside the doors welcoming customers still give a feeling of vitality. It seems like this is not the world after the end of the world, but some cold winter afternoon. It's so nice. This feeling, Zhou Qir exclaimed with a smile. It's like the end of the world never came. She suddenly put her arm around Zhang Yi's arm and said with longing in her eyes, Zhang Yi, we can rebuild Tianhai City in the future too. Let it return to its former prosperity before the end of the world. What do you think? Before Zhang Yi could say anything, Yang Xinxin spoke first. From what we can see so far, it's simply impossible. In terms of population, Tianhai City only has about 10,000 people. What's more, Tianhai City has been through many wars and has been severely damaged. She thought for a moment and said, However, it is more reasonable to replicate a miniature city that is 1/30th the original size of Tianhai City. Zhang Yi did not pick up on their conversation. His pace was not fast, like the other pedestrians on the street. His eyes were constantly scanning the surroundings. Every building, every passerby, every shop. After the end of the world, can it really return to the way it once was? Looking at everything in front of him, even he could not help but fall into deep thought. As they walked along the street, time passed unknowingly, and Zhang Yi and the others felt as if they had been transported to another world. At first, Zhang Yi even suspected that everything they saw was an illusion. Or perhaps these people on the street were not real people, but machines or puppets. But as they got closer, they realized that they were all real. This showed that Edo had returned to the appearance of a normal human society. In fact, it had even done a better job than Blizzard City and Xinjing City. How did they do it? I want to learn from them. Zhang Yi couldn't help but smile. The harmony here can be called a miracle of humanity. Unconsciously, he walked to a place with bright lights. It was still daytime, and although the skylight was not bright, there was no need to turn on the lights extravagantly. But in the area in front of him, the exterior walls of the high-rise buildings were covered with colorful neon lights. You could see them as soon as you looked up, and they were almost blinding. The key point is that these are not ordinary neon lights. There are huge screens hundreds of inches across, showing magical girls in cute outfits, videos for gal game advertisements with a very high degree of exposure, and advertisements for all kinds of maid cafes. Sir, Miss, welcome to Love House. Today we have an underground idol performance. A maid in a black and white maid uniform came over and handed a leaflet over with a smile. Zhang Yi subconsciously took the flyer, only then realizing that he had inadvertently arrived in Akihabara, the mecca of doujinshi in Edo. Electronic sounds filled his ears, and the crowd in front of him was bustling with activity. Doujinshi fans with backpacks on their shoulders were entering and exiting various manga bookstores. Dad, let's go check out that store together. A cute girl with twin ponytails and black and white striped stockings excitedly pointed to the Love House in front of them and said to the middle-aged man beside her, Daddy, let's go check out that store together. The middle-aged man looked down at the girl and smiled fondly. Okay, Eri-chan. Let's go together. In the thrift store on the other side, a woman with her hair tied up in a high bun and wearing a blue kimono walked out of the store, followed by her tall high school-aged son. Behind her, the shop assistant politely escorts her out the door. Have a good day, Mrs. Takeyanagi, and thank you for shopping with us. Zhang Yi looks at everything in front of her, and the maid cafe brochure in her hand slowly clenches. Suddenly, the sound of an ambulance can be heard. Not far away, it seems that there has been a car accident. The injured person has been rescued by several teenagers and is being given first aid by the roadside. The ambulance stopped nearby, and a doctor with long hair and a long nose ran over to check on the patient's condition. Then he shouted behind him at the woman in the pink nurse's uniform, Nanase, quickly give the patient oxygen. Yes. Dr. Harasaka. Looking at what was in front of him, Zhang Yi's brow slowly furrowed. He always felt that something was not quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on it for the moment. The maid next to him still eagerly introduced the underground idols performing today, telling how hard the young lady named Terracotta Tori worked and how good she sang. Zhang Yi looked down at the pamphlet and said to Zhou Qir and Yang Xinshin, let's go watch the show. The two didn't realize that Zhang Yi had such a hobby. But since they had come to Akihabara, it would be nice to experience a local specialty. So the three followed the maid into the cafe. Unexpectedly, there were quite a few people inside at this time. The cafe was not very big, with about 10 tables inside. They could see some private citizens with bandages on their heads, holding light sticks and signboards in their hands, already waiting excitedly. Zhang Yi and the others were seated at a table in the back, and then the maid handed them the menu with a smile. The prices were ridiculously high, with even a simple heart-shaped omelette rice selling for 100,000 won. But money was not a problem at all. Edo still used the electronic currency issued by the Neon National Bank as the general equivalent. When they arrived, Deng Shentong used his connections to credit everyone's accounts with 10 billion won to spend as they wished. However, Zhang Yi, in order to avoid attracting attention, only ordered a few expensive food and drinks, but this was enough to make the maid's smile become even more intense.